give the presentation along with him. He's going to show up, that's for sure, although he's late. And so let's begin. The title of my presentation is Rethinking HEC, is the separability argument a threat to non-classical cognitive science? And Guido and I belong to the Department of Philosophy and the Center for Cognitive Studies of the house. We belong to the house. And well, let me organize this. So I'll give you first an outline of the talk. First, the introduction about the motivation, aim, and key idea, the message that I want to get across. Secondly, I'll go into Descartes' two arguments about the mind. In the third place, I'll say some things about the classical cognitive science, which I relate to GOFI, good old-fashioned artificial intelligence, versus the quotation marks new cognitive science. Fourthly, I will say a few things about the hypothesis of extended cognition, so HEC, which was originally proposed by Chalmers and Clark. And then I will suggest two possible objections to HEC, which perhaps Descartes would reply to the hypothesis. And then I'll say things about the conclusions. So let's begin. So firstly, Descartes is a very complex philosopher for sure, and but when he characterizes the mind, there are two important concepts to bear in mind, which are substance and system, especially causal systems, like mechanisms. The first concept has to do with the idea that mind is a thing that can be independent. That's perhaps you can find that sort of view in the metaphysics on the meditation for first philosophy. And this is in line with the Christian view of life and afterlife, of course. Descartes is a very, he's very committed to Christianity. He's a believer, and that influences very much all his work. But at the same time, Descartes is supposed to be a modern philosopher, so he considers that the mind is a scientific phenomenon. And you can find that view on Passions of the Soul. He tries to reconcile the two viewpoints. So Descartes' metaphysics, for example, endorses the Christian view, but at the same time, Descartes also embraces the mechanistic view of the mind. So the thing then is how to reconcile thesis number 1 with thesis number 2. And then you have to consider that dualism is very important. Dualism has to do with the separability argument, especially. In the sense that, according to Descartes, the mind can be separated from the body. But at the same time, and this is rather curious, of course, Descartes endorses the view that the mind-body embodiment. So, and then he proposes the sailor and the ship disanalogy, also called the pilot and ship disanalogy. So, in other words, okay, now we go. So, secondly, Descartes' two arguments about the mind, which I described very briefly, and I think this is the core of dualism. Firstly, we have the separability argument, that mind and brain may exist separately, but at the same time, he claims that there has to be a disanalogy when it comes to explaining mind embodiment. So mind and body are closely joined and intermingled together. So in reality, let's say, mind and body are intermingled. But you may put forward an argument according to which mind can be separated from the body. So, brief notes on the separability argument. We can conceive that mind may exist without body. It's at least possible. Secondly, what we can conceive can be performed by Almighty God. That's very funny, of course, because Descartes seems to resort all the time to God in the end. The God is supposed to be a wild card. I won't say much about the specific situations in which Descartes resorts to God, but it's clear that concerning, for example, skepticism, God is very important because he's the final reply to the evil demon, the possibility of an evil demon. Then Descartes claims that mind and body may exist separately and are different, and that's what's called the real distinction. So, if we have to summarize the argument, is that mind and body have different properties. We can clearly and distinctly conceive that the mind exists and the body may not, and as omnipotent, God can make happen everything we can conceive. That's Descartes' wild card. I call it the wild card. Therefore, the conclusion is that it follows a real distinction. As mind and body can be separated, mind and body are different substances, so they are independent. Let's say in the realm of conceivability, and this is possible for God. God can separate mind and body, which are unified in reality. But at the same time, Descartes puts forward another argument, which is the pilot and the ship disanalogy. Now imagine the following situation. What if a captain were on the bow of the ship and he saw the damage of the stern from a long distance? The pilot would claim that all the damage has not much to do with him. He's observing the damage. And that's the opposite situation of what happens with the mind in terms of embodiment. Whenever we feel, for example, pain, for example, oh, hola Guido.
Hola Guido, ¿qué tal? Aquí adelante.
So, if the captain saw the damage of the bow from the stern, there would be some distance between them, between the captain and the damage. And this situation is again the opposite of Descartes feeling pain. That is, Descartes thinks and feels the pain not with his understanding, and that's the main point of the argument, but with the body. Thus, mind and body can be separated, but they are joined and intermingled together. And here you can see how Descartes argues. Nature also teaches me, by these sensations of pain, hunger, thirst, and so on, that I am not merely present in my body as a sailor is present in a ship, but that I am very closely joined and, as it were, intermingled with it, so that I and the body form a unit. If this were not so, I, who am nothing but a thinking thing, would not feel pain when the body was hurt, but would perceive the damage purely by the intellect, just as a sailor perceives by sight if anything in his ship is broken. And that you can find the argument in the sixth meditation. Now, moving on to the third part of the talk. I'm going to say a few things about classical cognitive science, what I call classical cognitive science, which is inspired mainly by O5, good old-fashioned artificial intelligence, and what I call the new cognitive science, which resorts much more to externalism. So it's in direct opposition to Descartes. So then we have programs, for example, and those programs just correlate symbols. And these are supposed to be abstract mechanisms. If that's the case, Oh, by the way, you can find that sort of explanation, mechanistic explanation, in Alan Turing, for example. That Alan Turing is the core of good old-fashioned artificial intelligence and classical cognitive science. I believe that digital computers could be used in such a manner that they could be appropriately be described as brains. This statement needs some explanation. In order for our computer to imitate a given machine, it is only necessary to program the computer to calculate what the machine in question would do under given circumstances. If now some particular machine can be described as a brain, we only have to program our digital computer to imitate it, and it will also be a brain. And he stresses that in the end. So computer programs are brains, are like brains. You can find that quote in Can Digital Computers Think?, which is a transcript of a BBC radio interview from 1951. Now we have a hypothesis about the origin of HEC, the hypothesis of extended cognition. I think perhaps Guido also shares the same thought, that it has to do with John Searle's Chinese room argument. Because within the argument, well, according to the situation Searle describes, which is only hypothetical, of course, if you have an input of Chinese ideograms, Chinese symbols, and you have data banks and a rule ledger, then you would be able to produce an output. So replies to questions unbeknownst to Searle. And there it's very interesting because one of the most important and popular replies is the system's reply. According to this reply, it's not Searle who has to understand Chinese, it's the whole system, the whole room. So it's the system rather than Searle, the one that understands Chinese. And it's more or less similar to the hypothesis of extended cognition, because all the parts of the system, the parts of the entire room, are somehow extended in space. Well, what I call the new cognitive science has to do with the extension of our cognitive faculties, especially our memory. For example, we may have memory banks everywhere. For example, notepads, shopping lists, mobiles, Google perhaps. And in that sense, the mind extends beyond brain and skin in the environment. So it resorts to externalism. Now, can the mind exist apart from brain? If you say no, if you answer no to the question, then mind can't be extended. No mind would be outside the brain and skin. But if you reply yes, many devices may integrate the mind. For example, memory banks in the physical world. It's very funny that people, I do it all the time, resort to devices in order to in order to avoid forgetting things. I do it all the time because I'm in my late 40s, so my memory is not as before. Now, moving on to the fourth part of the presentation. So, according to Chalmers and Clark, they put forward the reverse argument of the French philosopher. In what sense it's the reverse argument? What is the main thesis of HEC? It is externalism. Descartes is an internalist concerning cognition. So, according to Descartes, mind and body can be separated. That separability implies that the former can exist without the latter. Unlike Descartes, to the contrary of Descartes, HEC claims that parts of the environment are integrated into cognition. And the question that the interesting question to pose them is, could these devices be separated from your mind? And we say, it depends, because a possible objection to HEC can be proposed if the devices can be separated from your memory, for example, from your mind. So HEC endorses externalism. What means this? Well, that intelligent actions integrate the mind and the environment. And this has some important methodological consequences. I quote Clark here: in seeing cognition as extended, one is not merely making a terminological decision, it's not only conceptual. It makes a significant difference to the methodology of scientific investigation. But then there are two possible objections to HEC. One that is very Cartesian and one that is kind of Hegelian. What would happen about Otto's shopping list? Suppose Bill stole Otto's shopping list, and the list was still available to Otto as a memory bank. So Otto's mind could function the same as before, even though Bill has stolen the shopping list. That memory bank, in fact, could be separated from Otto. They are separable somehow, and yet the bank would be available. The Cartesian will insist such separation is at least conceivable. We can think of it. And the second possible objection is kind of Hegelian. What, for example, if we had, that's very possible, all the memory banks used by Google? HEC seems to be logically consistent with a Hegelian mind. In what sense? I'm going to leave some minutes for Guido, because he probably doesn't agree with me. An apparent consequence of HEC is the Hegelian mind possibility. For example, what if Otto, Bill, and Laura share the same memory banks? Then it would be possible to conceive collective minds, in the sense that they would all share the same devices. But that would mean that we have a Hegelian mind, in the sense that it's a collective mind that everyone has. If that's the case, then we have two possible objections, the Cartesian one and the Hegelian objection. And since we're doing fine with the time, yes. Some conclusions that follow from our research. From HEC, if we endorse HEC, firstly, the separability argument discourages cognitive scientists to clarify the nature and extension of cognition. So somehow Descartes encourages the cognitive border war, a word that is very interesting in intellectual terms, of course, and which ranges from internalism and to externalism. The second conclusion that is related to HEC is that the Cartesian separability argument promotes a more dichotomous and less non-ecumenical view of cognition. In fact, Descartes' dualism clearly affects the demarcation of cognitive science problems, that you can find that in a guide to 2018. But what if Descartes is right? Descartes, of course, would be against HEC. However, Descartes may strike back. In what sense? The separability of memory banks, the possibility that I explained. That even though you have the memory banks, you could be functionally equivalent before and after. So your mind functions the same way, even though you don't have the memory banks anymore. Now, from HEC, it seems to follow that collective minds exist, or could exist. Is that so? Well, it's an objection that can be, for example, proposed, and we have to deal with it, especially if you endorse HEC. So that's the last bit of my presentation. This is my son Leon, whose birthday was yesterday, and he's a wassail here. so Philip and Jose Luis now can understand what wassail means. So I'm going to leave some minutes so that Will explains some ideas, and perhaps he wants to say things about the objections, because perhaps we don't agree.
Ya, ya te acuerdo. Ah, 21, 18. Well, this is the first time in 2 years and a half that I speak in public. So, well, the first thing is how this work bonds. What are the origins of this work? First. We based not an intuition, but our own work on Paolo Bachetti, an Italian guy who suggests that Descartes, you can see in Descartes, or you can separate in virtue of, maybe in virtue of separability, you can separate the metaphysic Descartes from the scientific Descartes. So he, on this basis, he tried to ground some ideas in cognitive science in the scientific Descartes. He tried to arrange a little bit Descartes from what Descartes proposed. To update his views and giving it as a motivator to the new cognitive science. So the first thing that we take as a point of departure is that thesis, or as an inspiration, and try to see if that was true in new cognitive science. But, well, we found that if we consider it a scientific Descartes, it would be compatible at least with the classical cognitive science view, maybe with the, or I think that it is, with embodied cognitive science, and I don't know if situated or not, but the great problem was with what Rodrigo calls HEC. But I think that was the point of departure. I didn't speak with Rodrigo and I see abruptly appears the Hegelian mind, so I prefer not to say that. ¿Estamos en la hora? Sí, I don't know, what, 30 minutes?
Yeah. 3, 4 minutes, 4 minutes more.
Yeah. I don't think I have more to say, because I prefer that you discuss Rodrigo's thesis on the Hegelian minds and all that.
Okay, so thank you very much.